Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Wisdom Wednesday. It is great to be with you here on January 25th. We are looking through the 25th proverb that Solomon has written here, and man, has he ever written out a lot in this proverb. We're going to dissect some of it today, and I am confident that over the months ahead, we will find more time to spend in the 25th proverb together dissecting and extracting some of that wisdom that Solomon pours forth. But what we see here is I'm going to read a few verses, verses 6 through 8. We'll also look at verses 13, 19, 23, and 28. You don't need to write them all down because I'll highlight them again before I read them out. But let's start off by reading Proverbs 25, verses 6, 7, and 8. It says, "Do not exalt yourself in the king's presence, and do not claim a place among his great men. It is better for him to say to you, 'Come up here,' than for him to humiliate you before his nobles. What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court. For what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame?" There's a couple things that Solomon's really indicating here that I think are important for us to see, understand, and grab a hold of in our lives. Verses 6 and 7 deal with this concept of how lofty we see ourselves and putting ourselves in grandiose positions that we might not actually possess. He says that it is better to not put yourself in the position of these mighty or great men or people of renown, the nobles. You might very well belong there. But he says, don't pridefully place yourself there, because what might happen is you might put yourself there and the king or whoever is responsible might go, why are you here? You don't belong here. You need to get out. And all of a sudden, it's a humiliating experience as opposed to living a humble life and having someone of great stature, and I'll put that in quotations, calling out you and saying, "Hey, you belong here. Why don't you come up to this spot, to this table? Why don't you sit at my right hand and eat dinner with me tonight amongst all my honored guests? Why don't you be the most honored and sit right beside me?" Allowing our productivity, our life, the way we live to be more loudly expressed than the words and the views of ourselves. I think I said it last week. I guess I'm going to say it again. There was a quote that I heard from a professional sports athlete who was at the top of his game for the entirety of his career. And he said, "If you have something worth boasting about, you don't have to. Other people will do it for you." And as we read through scripture, we understand that there is an element to being cautious about putting pride in our accomplishments, and rather just being humble and diligent in the work that's been set before us. And that will be seen and recognized, maybe not always by the people we want it to be seen and recognized by, but God in heaven sees the diligence and integrity of our work, and in doing so, he will honor us. And we can see that there is that semblance of God being the king in this passage, that when we are diligent and integrous before him, he says, "Hey, come on up. I see you and the great things that you've been doing in the quiet and secret places." In verse 8, Solomon changes tunes a little bit, and he speaks about being cautious, about calling out and pointing to ruin in other people's lives. This is likely more in the same line of trying to establish ourselves above others. Like you and a coworker are gunning for a promotion, and they've done something maybe a little underhanded, and so you bring it to light and you try to make them look bad to have a better position or promotion or title or whatever it is. But Solomon is indicating like, hey, whoa, slow down. Because to the extent in which you're going to call out judgments on other people's lives, be prepared to have judgments called out in your own life. We see that as evident throughout Scripture, and it's in both the negative and the positive. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says that we need to forgive others to experience forgiveness. We need to allow that forgiveness, that inability or that desire to not ruin someone else, but to grant forgiveness, to override our desire for personal gain. It's coupled with verse 6 and 7, but there is some slight nuance difference in it. And so it sometimes people say it like this: when you point a finger at someone else, you have three pointing back at you. And so we want to be cautious about the words of ruin that we bring to other people's lives, trying to undermine. From this verse forward, Solomon begins to speak about legal court cases and the casting of contempt and legal issues towards one another, and the great caution that should be done in that it's not that these are areas where we need to be very aware of the reasons and the purposes that the legal systems act for those matters. And so when it comes to this, we want to be quick to look upon our neighbor with grace. That is the outpouring of this. Let's look at our neighbor with grace rather than always in condemnation and convictions. And certainly there are some things that need to be that need to be corrected. But let's allow grace to be our guide, even in the process of correction. Flipping the script here a little bit, looking at verses 13 and 19, we're going to get into our next topic here. So our first one is diligent and integrous, not prideful, and not quick to ruin, but walking in the integrity of grace. And in doing so, God will recognize that and honor it. In verse 13, Solomon uses this beautiful imagery. He says, like a snow-cooled drink at a harvest time is a trustworthy messenger to the one who sends him. He refreshes the spirit of his master. I'm going to read verse 19 as well. It says, like a broken tooth or a lame foot is reliance on the unfaithful in a time of trouble. And so I just wanted to explore these two contrasts a little bit. In verse 13, it speaks about that when there is a message to be given, a trustworthy person is like a cool drink of water in the time of heat and harvest, where it's like just refreshing and delicious, and it's trustworthy, it's dependable, and it gives us exactly what we need. On the reverse, an unfaithful or unreliable person is like a broken tooth or a lame foot. Now I've had a lame foot. I dislocated my ankle, rock climbing. I wish it was a cool story. It wasn't that cool. I fell an entire foot and a half and somehow just completely busted my ankle. But for about 12 weeks, I was either sitting or eventually on crutches, and I was completely unreliable in being able to do the things that I needed to do on a daily basis. And if someone was depending upon me during that time, I could imagine their frustration. And so Solomon is encouraging us to not be like a person with a lame foot or a broken tooth, which is nagging and uncomfortable and frustrating and it's everything that's unreliable, but rather to be a trustworthy person who refreshes and is consistent and constant like a snow-cooled drink in the harvest time. I wonder if Solomon was actually alluding to snow cones or slushies, in which case he was a businessman well ahead of his time, and 7-Eleven jumped on that money making train of slushies real well. This snow cool drink kind of makes me want to go get a slushie. Lastly, just kind of wanted to look at verse 23. Like a north wind that brings unexpected wind or rain is a sly tongue, which provokes a horrified look. Sometimes that can sound confusing, but essentially it means in an unexpected direction, when a sly, crafty, or conniving word is spoken, it cuts deeply. You would normally expect wind to come from a different direction as per the saying, and so you would be vulnerable towards the north is what this proverb is indicating. And it says that when we are vulnerable towards people who cut us down with conniving or sly words, it provokes a horrified look within us because we weren't expecting it. And we can't always expect these things, but just a word of caution and a word of encouragement from Solomon in this is just to not to definitely not be that north wind, that sly tongue, that conniving tongue, but also to be cautious that when it happens, hey, unexpected things come and go. Well, I had more that I wanted to say, but we've reached our 10-minute mark, and I want to stay true to our 10 Minutes of Wisdom Wednesday. So the rest of it's going to have to wait until the next Proverbs 25 day. And with that, God bless. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye.